Welcome everybody to the First Avenue Redesign Public Meeting number 1. We're awfully glad you're here. We will let the project team kick it off.
All right, thank you, Nora. And yes, I just want to reflect Nora's statement. Thank you so much for being here. Public input is a really important part of our project going forward. So I'm Marie Foaming. I'm the project manager, civil engineer at the City and County of Denver on this project. So we'll get into it a little bit more, but this project came out of the Denver Moves Cherry Creek plan that took the last couple of years. And just with everything going on this project and on this corridor, we knew we needed to break this out. And this is really the preliminary design phase. So we're really trying to make the right steps in the right direction as we work with this really confined right of way and make sure that we're making all the right steps to move forward. So we'll get into that a little bit more. I just wanted to introduce myself and I'll turn it over to Kayla.
Thanks, Marie. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so just to quickly go over our conversation for today, we'll cover the project's background and schedule. So starting with Denver Moves Cherry Creek, I'll give a quick overview of that plan and the high priority projects that came out of it, and then hone in on this specific project and schedule. Talk about the project elements, next steps, and then we'll have time for Q&A. Then we'll do a quick round of introductions from the project team. So my name is Kayla Zacharias. I am a planner on the bike ped team at Dottie. I worked closely on Denver Moves Cherry Creek, and I'm supporting Marie, who is the design PM for this project.
Yep, Marie Foaming, we kind of already introduced myself, but civil engineer and the PM from the design side at Dottie as well. So go ahead, Matt.
Matt Sirkowski with Kinley Horn and Associates. We are working with the city and the project team on the conceptual design phase that we're going to be moving forward with this phase of the project. I'm the engineering lead and the project manager on our side of the team. Thank you.
Nora Newrider with OV Consulting, supporting the team with community engagement and outreach.
I don't know. Mute. This is, why aren't you muting this?
All right, starting off with the background for Denver Moves Cherry Creek. This was a transportation area plan for the Cherry Creek neighborhood that we completed in 2024. So the goal for the plan was really to create a safer and more comfortable environment for all modes, including walking, biking, transit, deliveries, and driving in and around Cherry Creek. This was a really big plan and it was very thorough. So we conducted existing conditions, looking at how transportation is currently working in Cherry Creek. We did a potential future analysis. We looked at different growth scenarios for the future of Cherry Creek. We know there's a lot of development happening right now. And so we considered what transportation solutions would be most appropriate for the most likely growth scenario. We worked with community to identify projects. We refined the details and extents of those projects with community, and then we set a little bit of money aside for implementation. So we're working on design of a few projects right now. And as I mentioned, it's a really multimodal project. So it has recommendations pertaining to sidewalks, bikes and scooters, pedestrians, transit, multimodal, and urban amenities. We conducted really thorough outreach throughout Denver Moves Cherry Creek, and they were really focused around 3 phases. So the first phase was the existing conditions and analysis portion. We introduced the community to that plan.
And that was the original plan, we just have called it
Can you mute everyone? All right. We introduced the community to Denver Moves Cherry Creek and identified major concerns and priorities. We held a public meeting, several pop-up events, did small group discussions, and we had an online survey and interactive map. The next phase of the plan was really drafting recommendations. So we identified missing projects, refined project extents and locations, We talked to the community about project prioritization and informed the details of high priority projects. We had another public meeting, more small group discussions, and another online survey and an interactive map where people could point to specific locations in Cherry Creek and give us feedback. And then the final phase of the project was finalizing our project details and list. And throughout that phase, we informed the community about our draft projects and high priority projects, ensured that our list of projects was comprehensive and complete, and we modified a few projects based on feedback. So we had a public meeting to wrap that up, a pop-up event, more small group discussions, and another survey. So DMCC developed more than 600 project recommendations, and because there were so many projects coming out of this plan, we knew we had to find a way to prioritize them somehow. So we worked with the community to develop a process that elevated 12 high impact projects. And the graphic on the right shows the things that we considered. So are these projects really a community priority? Do they meet the project goals that we defined in Denver Moves Cherry Creek? Do we have some kind of special opportunity to advance these projects, such as development or an upcoming study? Are the projects focused on the Cherry Creek neighborhood? Do they provide a modal network balance, so providing benefits to all different kinds of modes? And then is there a crash history in this location? So 3 of the projects out of the 12 are the Cherry Creek Trail from Downing to University, the intersection at First and Spear, Downing and Corona, and then the First and University Boulevard intersection. So we're wrapping those 3 high priority projects into this First Ave project that we're discussing today. So the goals for this First Ave project really came out of Denver Moves Cherry Creek, and then we kind of honed in on this section of First Avenue and the intersections that bookend it. So the project goals are increasing mobility options for people who live in or travel to and through Cherry Creek, to improve safety and comfort for people walking and rolling on the Cherry Creek Trail, improving safety and comfort, especially for vulnerable road users at the Downing and University intersections, preserving space to operate future BRT, and achieving a true Parkway feel by adding trees on the south side of First Avenue. And because we're only taking this project to 30% design, we've got a pretty compact schedule. We kicked off internally in April, and we'll be wrapping up in August or September of this year. Then getting into the project elements. We can skip to the next slide. So focusing in on the Parkway and the trail. As I mentioned, we talked to the community a lot during Denver Moves Cherry Creek, and something that came up many times was the Cherry Creek Trail in this section. But just to provide some context about the trail, it's a really critical connection for commuters coming from East and Southeast Denver to downtown. It's the most heavily used trail in the city, with about 600,000 users a year near Downing Street. And it's most constrained, it's about 8 feet wide with no buffer from traffic except a curb and a striped shoulder. So through the engagement process, we heard consistently that safety and comfort on this section of the trail was a concern. And we considered a lot of different alternatives about how to move forward. So one kind of bucket of alternatives was adjustments along the southern side of First Avenue. So we looked at expanding the trail north by shifting the curb, expanding the trail south and into Country Club property, removing an eastbound traffic lane along First Avenue, or expanding the trail to the north with a temporary sidewalk. We also considered adjustments to the median, including narrowing a median or implementing center running bike lanes in the median. And we also discussed shifting the entire trail to the north side of First Avenue, or shifting the entire trail to follow Cherry Creek through Country Club property. So another consideration through our choosing of the alternative was that this section of First Avenue is part of the Spear Boulevard Historic District, which covers the Spear Boulevard corridor from the West Highlands neighborhood to University Avenue. Next slide. So some considerations that come with this section of First Ave being a parkway. Denver's Parkway standards identify several features, including a spacious tree lawn on both sides of this street, open space from the back of the curb to the nearest building, and planting of trees and shrubs. There are also specific design guidelines for Spear Boulevard and Cherry Creek, and a few of those include large canopy trees along the vehicular lanes and definition. So using landscape features to clearly delineate the active and passive pedestrian and auto and formal informal areas within and adjacent to the boulevard. So those are things we're thinking about when we're looking at what alternative we push forward. And now we're working with CPD's Landmark Preservation Manager at the city to prepare for a presentation to the Landmark Preservation Commission. So just want everyone to know that we're thinking about the historic nature of the Parkway here and preparing to bring this to the Landmark Commission. So the alternative that we ultimately landed on is shown here. The existing Parkway and Trail is on the top of the screen and the proposed Parkway and Trail is on the bottom half. So with the new alternative, we would widen the trail from the existing 8 to 9 feet to 12 feet. We'd add new trees and plantings on the south side of the trail, separating the trail from vehicle traffic. And to be able to get that extra space, we would need to reduce the median width and remove some trees. And then I'll hand it over to Marie to talk about the intersections.
Yes, thank you, Kayla. So as Kayla mentioned, 2 of the projects as well that came out of the DMCC project was looking as well at the intersections and how these intersections function. So what we heard is that the community wants multimodal improvements along First Avenue Steel Street corridor, but we're also looking for those time to support improving safety and comfort at the large complex intersections. So on the west side, we have the Corona Downing couplet where Corona now kind of merges back in with Downing on the south side. So that makes a very big intersection in and of itself, but there's also a lot of bike and ped users using Downing to connect to the Cherry Creek Trail, whether it's continuing north and connecting or even going across the First Avenue Bridge and connecting to the trail that way. So we're looking at some of our goals for improvement are to make it intuitive for drivers. I think to some degree there's challenges for drivers knowing what lane to be in, and as well as then for pedestrians and bikes trying to have the right wayfinding so they know how to get to the destinations that they're trying to get to. A big thing with the intersections as well is bus rapid transit. We know that there's some ongoing studies looking at bus rapid transit along Spear and how that is going to connect. And we want to make sure that whatever we plan for now and get ready to implement now doesn't have to get ripped out and can help us even start preparing for a future with BRT on the corridor. So that's a few things that we're looking at as well. Let's go on to the next page. All right, we'll take a look, first of all, at University intersection. So we already recognize that there's really long crossing distances for pedestrians and bicycles in this area. And there's a lot of things happening here for cars, and then you start throwing in pedestrians and vehicles, and it makes it very challenging for all users. So some of what we're looking at is possibly removing these slip lanes, because sometimes there's people crossing in there and a car is coming through and thinking that they've got a free right turn, and it causes a conflict point. So can we remove that? What does that do to vehicle volumes and operations? If it's not possible, kind of operations wise, we will also look at the possibility of adding in raised crosswalks here. So that would slow down drivers to cause them to kind of stop and pause a little bit before navigating through the intersection. We also want to look at widening the pedestrian refuge areas. So I know when I was out there not too long ago, it was challenging to get across, and I'm a fairly able-bodied person. And so making sure that if you're only able to cross halfway, you have a safe place to stand and wait, and possibly even another pedestrian push button to call the signal again and things like that. Right now, it also seems like these pork chop islands aren't very friendly for bike users, let alone if we have pedestrians and bikes sitting on this little island. So what can we do to improve that? And then looking at any upgrades or potential upgrades to the existing bus stops that are in proximity to this intersection. So at this point, I think there's just one in the northwest corner. And I understand that it doesn't quite meet ADA current standards. So we want to make sure that it's identified to be upgraded to our current ADA standards and meets that criteria as well. On the west side is, as we were already talking about a little bit, over at Downing and Corona, we know that there is a high crash rate throughout this intersection. There's a lot of lane transitionings going on and left turn only lanes that are not necessarily intuitive for drivers, right? As Corona's trying to make its way back in with Downing, is there maybe a way that we can make that a little more intuitive or put down some more paint markings, or what do we need to do there? So looking at some of that. It's also very uncomfortable for bikes and peds due to all the conflicts with turning users. In particular, I kind of alluded at this in that southeast corner. We know that there's heavy pedestrian and bicycle movements there, as well as heavy traffic in that area. So that just increases the opportunity for conflicts. So looking through that and seeing what we can do to make that better. Some of the things that we've started to identify is doing a leading pedestrian interval. So having kind of an all stop for vehicles for a few seconds that allows pedestrians and bikes to get out in the intersection quicker so that they're in a more visible spot as then the traffic is given the green and they can go through. We said widening, add the wayfinding and signage for bikes. So maybe some of that isn't very intuitive of what directions and how people can connect to the Cherry Creek Trail. Make that a little bit more understandable and intuitive for users. Kind of like what we're doing across the city is tightening up curb radiuses. That also tends to slow down car traffic as they travel around the corners, which makes them to pay attention a little bit more too. I know a few years ago, there was what we call a paint and post, kind of a temporary installation out there. So looking at how maybe we can harden up some of that area with the hash marks and things and make that a little bit better, which give a little bit more room to pedestrians and bike users, as well as then make it more direct on where cars need to be. Then long term, we're looking at dedicating that additional space for bikes and peds, but we're also looking at some opportunities for the future bus rapid transit stations in this area. So possibly widening the median on the south side of Downing there. And that might be big enough to do maybe a future BRT station, or taking maybe some of the real estate on the other side in that corner as we reconfigure that right turn lane and see if we could maybe relocate the bus stop that's currently on the bridge in the southeast corner, maybe locate it off of the bridge and hopefully make it a little bit more accessible and easier for people and then trail users as well. So that's what we've got so far.
Awesome. Thanks, Marie. Yeah, so since the completion of the Denver Moves Cherry Creek plan, the city and the project team have been preparing to advance the conceptual design based off of the preferred cross-section that Kayla referenced just a couple minutes ago. So far in this phase of the project, we've been able to get a better understanding of the corridor through the data collection that we've completed, which has included a detailed base mapping exercise, a subsurface utility engineering investigation, a tree health inventory, and coordination with city departments. So through this process, we've had the opportunity to identify some trade-offs and constraints for the corridor. And while all of these were identified during the planning phase, we're just continuing to get a little bit of a better understanding of them as the project develops. Each of these trade-offs and constraints, you can kind of think of them as like separate puzzle pieces. And while they may not fit perfectly together, we're able to kind of like sand down the edges on some of them to make sure that it is a puzzle that works together, and we're able to achieve the goals of the project as closely as possible from the original intent. So on the screen here, you'll see a couple images and some bullets about these different trade-offs and constraints. And I wanted to break them down into a couple different buckets for the purposes of our discussion. So the first bucket is right-of-way and space allocation. So within our proposed improvements, we have a lot of different elements that we need to accommodate. A trail, a tree lawn, different travel lanes, and the median and everything in the parkway. Each of those elements has a kind of minimum width and necessary design elements that are associated with it to make sure that it functions properly as intended. However, we do have limited space. So again, we're designing within the right of way, and the westbound lanes of First Avenue are not going to be impacted with the project. So we have a constrained space, and that is really introduces a design challenge that we're going to have to coordinate. The next bucket is the trees in the historic parkway, kind of like Caleb pointed to a little bit ago. The planning project identified that trees would need to be impacted in order to achieve the preferred cross-section, but that the project would also enhance the tree canopy on the corridor through installation of new trees as well. So as the design develops, we're going to have a little bit better understanding of the impacts of the trees, as well as the opportunities for restoration and enhancement of that canopy along the corridor. And this is something that we're going to work really closely with the City Forestry Department, as well as the different historic commissions related to the historic side of the parkway. So I mentioned the tree inventory that we've done. We've done a complete analysis of the corridor to make sure that we have an understanding of all the trees that are out there, their quantity, location, health, all their species, all that is documented. And we'll use that during the conceptual design phase to make sure that we're informed on what the impacts are specifically to the tree canopy. Outside of just the trees, there's other elements in the corridor that need to be considered from a historic element. So there's different planters, luminaires, there's a couple historic structures out there. So we'll need to look at how we can maintain all of those to preserve the historic nature of the corridor. So the next bucket is utilities. As with any urban corridor, there's going to be utilities, and First Avenue is no exception. There is everything you could hope to see out there, public and private alike. There's electric, communications, irrigation, gas, storm, sanitary sewer, everything. And so each of those different utilities has a different level of flexibility and design criteria that we have to take into consideration as we're advancing the conceptual design. So, for example, a couple of these considerations would be vertical clearance. We want to make sure that we understand the depth of those utilities that are out there, and if the crown of the road changes for whatever reason, we want to make sure that we're not encroaching on those vertically. Lateral clearance is another thing that's really important. We want to make sure that as we're proposing vegetation or drainage improvements or any other structures, that we have adequate separation from those existing utilities per their different requirements. And then in the median, for example, we know that if we move that curb line in, there's some streetlights that are really close to the curb line that we're going to impact, as well as some irrigation infrastructure. So just planning ahead and knowing that we will have some impacts in the median. So for our project, we're going to kind of start on the south side and work our way to the north. We know that within that footprint, there are many of these utilities that we've talked about. There's a sanitary sewer line, there's different public and private items in the roadway. And so we'll need to take close consideration of all of those as we're advancing the conceptual design. We're going to work diligently with the city and the owners of those utilities to minimize the impacts to the extent that we can and mitigate them in order to see the vision of the project through. The last kind of bucket is this is a roadway project and a multimodal project within the city. And so we're going to work really closely with the city to make sure that the improvements that we're recommending are in accordance with the different standards and specifications to make sure that we have a safe and functioning multimodal and roadway facility, and to make sure that everything is able to drain properly out there in the ultimate conditions. So thanks for hearing me out on the trade-offs and constraints, and I'll pass on.
I can take back over. Going through next steps. So today, June 18th, is our first public meeting. Bike to Work Day is next Wednesday, and we will be on the Cherry Creek Trail, sort of behind the mall, talking to everyone who's coming through about this project. late summer, we plan to have our second stakeholder working group meeting and public meeting. And then we'll wrap up the project August, maybe early September. And with that, we'll open it up for discussion. We have some prompts here, but I know the chat's been very active, so I doubt we'll need the prompts. But Nora, if you want to start feeding us questions.
Yeah, thank you to everyone for putting questions in the chat. We really appreciate that. We'll work through some of these questions, and certainly if there's somebody who has a question that they would like to pose verbally, please raise your hand and we can take it that way. There are, of course, a number of questions regarding the median and the trees. They cover everything from how do you think the trees will be impacted, and how will trees be maintained? So I think first I will ask if the team could speak to the tree research and inventory that is underway as part of this project to understand the median and the trees.
Yeah, I can maybe start out on that. Yeah, so what we've done thus far is we've got a forestry team that is part of the project team. We've gone out and met with the city forester and associated staff out in the field to do a reconnaissance of the trees that are out there. And so that includes a detailed measurement and location of every tree that's out on the corridor to identify its location, as well as its size, species, its health. And out along the corridor, there's something around 160 trees that are out there. And so we've been able to get a good understanding of where each of those trees are and all of their different attributes. As the project advances, we can then use that information to have a really precise understanding of what trees may be impacted depending on how the improvements are conceptually laid out, and have an understanding of those improvements and associated impacts as it is compared to the tree health. And so ideally we want to minimize the impacts to the trees to the extent as we can, but we can also understand the longevity and the long-term health of those to help inform any decisions related to that as well.
We have a follow-up question regarding the care of trees on the Parkway and who is responsible.
Yeah, I can answer that one. The trees, most trees in the city right-of-way are overseen by the city forester. And because the median itself is overseen by parks, then it's kind of in conjunction with parks and with the city forester.
And is that true of the tree lawns on either side of the Parkway?
Yes, that would be the true of them.
Okay. We have a series of questions too about the alternatives that were considered and rejected, namely.
Really quick, Nora, it looks like
yeah.
we had a hand raise up. I just wanted to make sure if that was related to the tree question, if we should answer that.
Mike? You had your hand raised?
No, yeah, it was not related to the trees. It was a separate question.
Oh, okay.
Mike, since you're unmuted, why don't we take your question?
Oh, okay. Well, feel free to table it and to continue the thought you had, but this was just about the Cherry Creek Trail connection to Downing and the sidewalk that goes towards Wash Park. And I was just wondering if that was part of the project plan and if there was other alternatives of getting onto the trail other than the current layout.
Are you thinking specifically like south of First Avenue or kind
the
of that
south side of First, right? Exactly. The connection of the Downing sidewalk on the south side of First. And if there's going to be considerations of not having to cross First to get to the Cherry Creek Trail.
Right now, we've at least flagged the sidewalk along the First Avenue Bridge over the Cherry Creek. I believe that's kind of what you're talking about. We're not necessarily looking very far down along Downing itself, but that is something that we can flag for additional looks at, especially, you know, the sidewalk program that Denver's kicking off and things like that too. So some of that can go into that bucket.
We're not considering rerouting the trail. I think it would be outside of the scope of this project, but as we mentioned, we are looking at seeing if we can extend the sidewalk a little bit. Doing anything significant would likely have to wait until the First Ave Bridge is rebuilt. And it's currently in good condition, so that's not happening anytime soon. We have flagged this for the bridge team and we'll stay coordinated with them whenever that does come up. But we are looking into how much additional load the bridge could handle and how much sidewalk width we could add here, but it wouldn't be anything significant until the bridge is rebuilt.
Thanks, Mike. Back to questions in the chat. We have questions regarding the alternatives that were considered. One, the purchase of land from the Denver Country Club. Two, a physical barrier between the existing trail and the roadway. Can you speak to the thinking that went into considering those alternatives and why they're not on the table?
Yeah, so I think a Jersey barrier on the south side of First Avenue would be not as it would be really like a band-aid solution. It wouldn't achieve the project goals that we've set out to achieve. You know, it wouldn't be very conducive to the Parkway standards that Denver has. And yeah, it just wouldn't be as a significant of a revision for the corridors we're hoping to achieve. You know, we've got a lot of different groups and constituents who are hoping to receive benefits from this, so it needs to be more all-encompassing than a Jersey barrier. And as for buying land for the country club, it was just not a financially viable solution. Jersey barrier is like a concrete barrier that's maybe this wide, 4 feet tall. It's just a concrete barrier.
Right, and Kayla, I'll add into that, yeah, by placing in the Jersey barrier, first of all, it does become a bit of a roadway hazard, so we have to look at it from that way as well. But it also does not achieve that project goal of actually widening and providing more width. So right now, the existing right of way is almost at the back of the edge of the trail on that south side. So that's what we're talking about being very constrained by our right of way too.
Thanks, Marie. I see 3 hands up, but before we get to those hands, there's a question about funding. What is the funding for this project? And the other question that I was hoping that you could get to before we get to the hands is Dottie's Green Infrastructure involved? If you could speak quickly to the other agencies, you mentioned forestry, and if you could speak to the other agencies that are involved in the project.
Yeah, we coordinated closely with green infrastructure, forestry, parks, and community planning and development while we were choosing the alternative for this section. And we're still coordinating closely with all of them now. So everyone that has a stake in this project is closely looped in. And then as for funding, as I mentioned, we're taking this project to 30%. So that's what we have funding for right now. We do not have funding to take this fully to 100% design or for construction right now. And part of the goal of this project is developing an accurate cost estimate so that we know how much funding we need to complete the design and construct the project.
Right.
And I just want to say, I know there are a lot of questions in the chat about different alternatives we considered. I think we're happy to answer those questions offline, but we did a lot of outreach to choose the preferred alternative. And this is what we have and this is what we're moving forward with. So would really like to keep the conversation focused on what we've landed on and how we're moving forward.
And at least one thing related to funding. So some of the funds that were set aside for the Denver Moose Cherry Creek, that's all in the city funds at this point, and that's part of what is advancing us to the 30% design too.
Joseph, if you could unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. I'm the chair of Historic Denver, and we did have a meeting with Kayla from Dottie last week. But one question remains unanswered. Why is it that Dottie's final plan dated February 2024 is silent about the existence of a special set of design guidelines adopted by the city in 2005 for the historic designated parkways, including First Avenue, which specifically states that medians shall be preserved and shall not be narrowed?
That statement seems like it's missing some context. I'm sure it is, preferred to not touch the median if possible. But we worked with a lot of different agencies who agreed that establishing a new tree lawn on the south side of First Avenue and doing everything we can to mitigate tree loss in the median would be worth losing some trees in the median.
Thanks, Kayla. Fong, if you could unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, for sure. I wanted to ask about the long-term vision of this. I know that you have 30% design to be completed by September of this year, which is what was budgeted. Are we just doing these public outreach to check boxes and in the meantime having very controversial conversations that ultimately will not result in any meaningful improvement? And because one, we don't have the funding, and two, landmark preservation seems to be a roadblock in this, and you're not willing to remove travel lanes. So what is where is this coming from? Like, why is now the time to bring this 30% design?
Tom, thank you so much for that question. I really appreciate it. This, like you say, there's a lot that we've got to focus on, and that's why we're really glad that we're focused on 30% design at this point. The whole DMCC plan really focused on getting that good input in. We are continuing to work very closely with landmark preservation to make sure that we're following the spirit and intent of this document that goes clear back to 2005. And really and truly, that document also speaks to having a tree line on the south side as well as part of that overall would be nice to have for that overall vision. Part of your asking about future proofing this, and the reason, unfortunately, the taking out a travel lane is really hard to include in the concept is because we know that this corridor is being looked at for bus rapid transit. So right now, if we took the 3 lanes and cut them down to 2, that means in the future, on the south side of the street, we would only have 1 lane of traffic going in because the other second lane would be converted into a dedicated bus lane. So in the attempt to continue to future-proof, we will have 3 lanes and the bus will operate near term, but in the long term, it will be cut back to 2 lanes of traffic. So that's like you're saying, we're making sure that we're looking at that from a cost perspective and future proofing the design.
For sure. And if I can just ask a quick follow-up question, have we done any studies to see how many lives will be saved by doing that travel lane reduction? Because cars travel at, and I'm sure you know all the traffic studies involved on this particular road, and it's both a multimodal and transportation project. And I think doing a cost benefit analysis of the lives that will be saved, like not just from fatalities, but also, serious body injuries of cars and or of drivers and bikers, etc. Like, I feel like that would be worth, getting an override of landmark preservation or like something so that we are valuing lives over aesthetics. And that'll be my send off.
Yeah, I can chime in on that. That kind of modeling, safety modeling, is really difficult to do. We're looking at that on BRT projects as we're choosing configurations, and it's just really difficult to estimate with a higher degree of certainty what the real safety impacts will be of different kinds of configurations. You know, we know that providing more physical separation, making improvements at the intersections, eventually dedicating a lane to BRT will lead to safety impacts, and those are really driving our decisions. But it is difficult from a modeling standpoint to put a number on it.
Thanks, Kayla. We do have a question from Richard Barrett concerning the removal of slip lanes and the impact on through traffic at those intersections. Marie, that might be a question for you.
Yeah, so I guess basically that is something that we're looking at, and that's one thing that Matt's team, Kim Horn is focused with modeling, is looking at traffic operations. We know right now at our peak hour that we've got a level of service, I think D for the intersection there at University. There's just so much traffic and everybody going through that intersection. And so they're going to be performing the modeling to look and see if we take out that slip lane, we can still have a dedicated right turn possibly in there. But what does that do operationally? So that is getting looked at in this process. And that's also part of the determination of if we're going to need to then look at raised crosswalks instead and go ahead and keep the slip lanes. So that's kind of like you say, that next step as we develop this 30% design.
Thanks, Marie. Josh, you have your hand up?
Hi. So I'm on the South Hilltop RNO, which is a little farther southeast of Denver. This is, you know, like we have to use this bike lane in order to get downtown. With the development coming in Cherry Creek, right, we're going to stick like 1,000 cars in between us and downtown, which is basically like a wall of traffic. Would this be sort of done in conjunction with that development? Like, is it gonna be 30% and then just kind of sit? How does it, you know, interact with the development going on in Cherry Creek?
Yeah, I can take that. We're coordinating closely with development, but the short answer is we don't know. We were hopeful that we would receive funding through the upcoming bond for this project, and it's to be determined whether that pans out. So we're hopeful. But if that doesn't pan out, we'll have to look at other funding options. You know, we could go after state or federal funds. Dottie doesn't have internal funding to go after it right now. So it could be a little while, but you know, having this design and doing this outreach will make us more competitive for funding opportunities. But
Awesome. I gave my 90 seconds in support of it for the bond at some other point. So thank you.
thank you so much.
Thanks, Josh. Lou, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Having served on Denver Moves Cherry Creek for the number of years with many of the good people on this team, I just remind everybody that there was a substantial amount of outreach as to these options before. So some of these questions really were pretty heavily addressed at that time. I also want to say that I think Joshua's point is a good one, and I want to respond to it specifically because as the chair of the Cherry Creek Steering Committee, several of the neighborhoods negotiated a fairly robust development agreement and community benefit agreement with East-West partners on the entire Cherry Creek West development. That does call for some of the improvements that are consistent with what we tried to get here. Those improvements will include protected bike lanes, both up from the trail on Clayton Lane and on the east side of the Cherry Creek West project. And then we'll go in front on First Avenue, continuing across the street. So the other point I wanted to make is we're really trying to make that easier for commuters to get across. And I take advantage of those slip lanes all the time because I live in Cherry Creek. It is dangerous when you start adding more and more people in Cherry Creek West.
Thank you, Lou. Hong, you have your hand back up again.
Yes, I just wanted to share that. Thank you so much, Lou, for sharing your input and like that. As a commuter who bikes so much on Cherry Creek Trail, I've had multiple instances with those slip lanes where I have, been disincentivized to cross the street at that intersection to go to the Whole Foods, to visit that side of the mall, just because that intersection is so large. And I've had multiple close misses with drivers just not looking at the slip lanes. Something that I wanted to really identify is, I know that a lot of planning and conversation goes into these things, and what is the timeline of getting it done? Because Denver is the sixth most polluted city in America. Like, that was just released very recently. Like, we simply do not have the time to wait for, like, climate change is here, and we really need to take decisive action and move forward with building up protection and multimodal shift. And what I'm really uncomfortable with Denver's county and city, and I know other external partners have been other external partners have also struggled with the city, is how slow it takes to get anything done and get anything through and get anything built. And so I want to hone in on that timeline.
Hey, team, I thought I might be able to help with this one. I'm Sam with Dottie as well, and I'm hearing a lot about, what is the benefit of advancing a project to this next stage of design, even though we don't have it fully funded. And this is there's some kind of indication in the chat. This is a bigger project, a multi-million-dollar investment. And the work that we're doing now is putting this on the fastest path that we have available to get it built as fast as we can. And as Kayla noted, by doing this design now, we are in a better position to get more funding to get to construction. So it is a means to an end. And I recognize that because we don't have that next step funded, it's like, why are we having these, going through all these motions now? But again, to just emphasize, this places this project on the fastest path possible to be constructed. And, when we kind of did a look back of how long has this condition persisted, this section of the Cherry Creek Trail has been like this for more than 20 years. And so if we don't initiate a process like this to advance the design, it's unclear if it would persist this way for another 20, 25 years.
Thank you, Sam. And I also wanted to kind of piggyback on that and second that But yes, this is part of what we're doing here as well, is trying to get some of the stumbling blocks out of our way. So by working with forestry, working with parks, working with Landmark Preservation Commission, and also we're trying to reach out to our partners on the utility side, the private and public utilities out there, and starting to work around some of these design challenges and lock down agreements as well. So the design process can even get stalled with that. So by the time we complete this 30% design, we will have a set of plans that has been vetted by you, the public, first of all. And as well, we will start having some of these agreements in place with forestry and have a locked-in plan that we know that we can get done and accomplish. And even some of these preliminary agreements with utility companies and those kinds of things. So if it does sit for a little bit of time as we go and seek additional funding for final design, well, I guess the other big thing that comes out of 30% is having a more concrete cost estimate that then we know what our total budget is estimated to be for the final design as well as for construction. So those are some really big steps that we're going to have in place and that are really important to get done as we work through this process through September.
Thanks, Marie and Sam.
I
Allison,
did want to mention really quick too that I can't remember if we did or not, but we are also working with Green Infrastructure. They are super excited about this corridor and the opportunities that we're going to have to implement some green infrastructure plantings and work with the historic nature and modernize some of this potentially too, and bringing in this idea of what we have with green infrastructure. So they're very much one of our key partners. That could also be an avenue for some of the funding to the project as well as we move into final design and into construction.
And Marie, just on that point too, one of the things that we heard a lot through our original planning for this is also that the section of the Cherry Creek is quite hot in the summer, and coming up on a week where we're going to have temps over 100 degrees. The fact that we don't have a shade canopy on that section of the trail, and you know the trees are concentrated in the median, we just recognize from a green infrastructure and kind of a place making perspective, making this like a more comfortable and enjoyable and cooler street to walk along is another real opportunity to move some of that tree canopy to a place where people are going to be and where they don't have the benefit of air conditioning and things like that to make them cooler.
Thanks.
David, you have your hand up.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to thank you, Sam, for that explanation. But in the winter, that trail is very icy because of the lack of sun that gets onto the pavement. Have you guys considered any mitigation for that? Even with a wider trail, is that enough to melt the snow that accumulates there?
Yeah, so team, feel free to chime in on this, but one of the other obvious issues with the Cherry Creek Trail as it's designed right now, it's very narrow. So it's like if we do plowing operations, where does that snow go? And by establishing a tree lawn, you create a space where the snow can be kept in a location that's not on the trail. So it makes maintenance of the trail easier if we have a tree lawn. And I totally agree with you. The shade, lack of a place to store it creates a condition that's not ideal in the winter months, that creates icing. And we really do feel like this project could help year round.
Yeah, and similar to that, Sam, having that tree lawn space between the travel lanes and the bike facility itself will help mitigate some of the splash and spill off from the roadway itself, and it will decrease it from the roadway side as well.
Thanks to both of you. Back on the subject of partner agencies, somebody wrote in the chat that DPR requires a replacement of tree canopy, not just number of trees. I'm wondering if you could speak to that just for a second in terms of the obligation to replace the tree canopy.
Yes, so the existing tree canopy within the median, that is definitely part of that consideration. And that's why we're talking about as we need to, as we cut out the median a little bit and remove some of the trees, looking for opportunities where we can also plant new trees in the median as well. So that would help mitigate the tree canopy on that side. Already the preliminary work that we've done with forestry, they are super excited for the amount of trees that we can potentially get on the south side in this new tree line. So that helps now enhance an area that doesn't have a current canopy, as we just talked about. And so that helps offset it.
Yeah, and the tree lawn on the south side of the street is proposed to be at 8 feet wide, and that's something that has had a lot of coordination and buy-off from city forestry and parks. And what's important to note about that is it is a wide enough space in order for a tree to have a healthy growth and life, and to promote a stronger tree canopy.
We're actually at time, and we want to respect everybody's summer evening. We very, very much appreciate the 50 plus people who showed up for tonight's agenda, and we hope that you continue to follow this project. Project team, would you like to wrap up the evening?
Sure. I guess I'll let Kayla, you can go ahead and say a few words, and I guess I can say a few words to wrap this up.
Yeah, I'll just add that I'll put the link to the project website in the chat. So information regarding the project and the public meetings going forward will be there. And just a reminder that we'll be on the Cherry Creek Trail from 7 to 9 a.m. next Wednesday. So hope to see some of you there.
Yeah, and with that, again, just seconding, thanking you guys for spending your time with us, for the great conversation, your feedback, your comments. All of that is getting digested and brought in, and just hope that you got a better understanding of what we hope to accomplish with the dollars that we're spending now to get us to 30%. We really hope that this is going to be a great building block and really position this project so that it gets accomplished finally and gets built, because I know it sounds like all of us have been waiting a long time for this. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes our program for tonight.
Thank you.